My name is Jan Wilczek from thewolfsound.com. Welcome to WolfTalk, a podcast about audio programming. In this podcast, you will learn how to build your career in programming or research related to audio, meet programmers and researchers from all around the world, and learn about the intricacies of sound. Hi everyone, and welcome to the 26th episode of the WolfTalk podcast. Today, as usual, I have a very special guest for you, namely Orchisama Das. She's a postdoctoral researcher at King's College London, where she works on immersive audio research, but she also did her PhD at the famous CCRMA Institute at the University of Stanford. She was a researcher at the University of Surrey and a senior audio research scientist at Sonos, a headphone manufacturer. She also completed research internships at Tesla and Meta. So you may imagine while it is very exciting to interview someone with such a rich background in DSP research, both, in the research in the university space and the industry company space. She's well known in the DSP community for her work on virtual acoustics, artificial reverberation, augmented reality, and extended reality. In the podcast, we discuss these concepts in detail, and I specifically ask Orchi on which resources are best to learn about reverb and virtual acoustics. We also discuss the reality of DSP research and the gender imbalance in this environment. So, if you would like to check out this rich episode and one of its references, mentioned resources, people, etc., please go to episode notes at thewolfsound.com/talk026. Once again, it's thewolfsound.com/talk026. If you'd like to somehow help the podcast, you would like to support the podcast, please consider subscribing to the WolfSound channel on YouTube and giving this video a thumbs up, leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify, and suggesting in the comments on YouTube who should be the next guest. I am recording this intro in December of 2024, but it'll probably be at the beginning of 2025 when this episode airs. So if you're thinking of the goals you want to achieve in 2025, and you may be wondering how you could learn digital signal processing for audio programming to do DSP research like Orchi, or to create your own creative audio plugins, if that's, on your list of New Year's resolution, I have a resource that can help you on this journey. Check out my DSP Pro online course. It's a great all-in-one learning package to finally understand audio processing, even if you don't have maths, programming, or engineering background. There are many musicians, sound engineers, web developers, and students who have already gone through the course. The course covers everything you need to know on audio DSP, from the basics through frequency processing, filters, efficient implementation structures, up to audio formats and audio effects. If you're still hesitant, I can assure you that the course is risk-free. After the purchase, you have 30 days to return the course. If you don't like it for some reason, no questions asked. Finally, if you're looking for more personalized guidance, you can choose a package that covers one-on-one mentoring, which will allow you to further boost your results and get all your questions asked without leaving your study room. If you're interested, you can find more details at wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. Once again, it's wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. And now, Orchisama Das. Hi, Orchi. Thanks for agreeing on this interview. Could you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hi, Jan. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. My name is Orchisama Das, and I am an audio researcher. I am currently based in the UK, but I did my PhD in the US and then moved to the UK for a postdoc. And I'm currently doing a postdoc at King's College in London, but I've also had some industry experience. So I've moved back and forth between academia and industry, which is becoming more common these days, which is a good thing. So yeah, I think that's my bio in short.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to discuss this bio in more detail in this interview. So my first question is, where are you exactly from? And then how did your interest in music develop there?
Yeah, so I'm from India, from this city called Kolkata, or Calcutta as it was formerly known. And I think when I was in school and about 12 years old, I pestered my mother that I really wanted to play the guitar. And she said no. But I think I kept pestering enough. And then they bought me a guitar and I started taking some lessons. And then I got really into it. Also, it was like a cool thing to do, right, when you're in school. And everyone's like, oh, you play the guitar. Yeah, and I got like pretty good at it. And then I got my first electric guitar and then my bass guitar. And when I got my first electric guitar and I got like this processor, the sound processor, I think that's what really sparked my interest in effects. I was like, oh my God, you can do so much and create all sorts of different sounds. And how are people doing this? So I think that's kind of what led me into this path.
Okay, awesome. And so you somehow then wanted to pursue this in like something related to music in academia, because from what I saw in your bio, then you started in 2012 a bachelor's degree in instrumentation and electronics engineering. I'm not going to pronounce the name of the university, so please do it for me. But was it the reason, like the passion for music and sound effects?
No, I didn't really know that you could do something with engineering and sound. I didn't really think about it. So in India, when you're graduating from high school, it's really competitive, and you have to give these competitive exams to get into these technical institutes, right? So I didn't get into like the premier institute, which are known as the IITs, but my institute was like very well known in my state. It's called Jadavpur University, JU in short. And and I was doing electronics engineering, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm interested in maths and science, but I'm not. And I'm good at my courses. I'm getting good grades, but I didn't really find like a passion for it, you know. And I think at that point of time, I think it was my uncle who had a friend who worked at a film institute in Calcutta. I think he was the head of the department of the sound engineering department, and I spoke to him, and he pointed me to this book called The Physics of Musical Instruments or something like that by Tom Rossing. And I was like, what? There's an entire field of research that's dedicated to this. And I think that's what really opened my eyes. And then I found out about the kind of research that's happening in music technology and decided that, okay, if I want to, continue further studies, this is what I want to do. I don't want to just be an electronics engineer. This is what I want to focus on.
Okay, nice. So from what I saw, that in 2015, then you had this research internship at the University of Calgary in Canada. So was it already, a step towards somehow combining engineering with music?
Yeah, although this was not related to music, but it was related to sound. So it was, there's a scholarship known as MyTax Global Inc., which is just an organization that funds research internships for undergraduate students from different countries. And the host institution is always some university in Canada. So they fund quite a few hundreds of students, I think, to go to Canada every year and carry out this 12-week long research internship. And I thought that, yeah, okay, this is good, because I by then I had figured out I wanted to go to grad school. And if I wanted to go to grad school to do what I want to do, then I would have to leave India, because there was no program in India that taught these things. So I was like, okay, let me try and get some experience, of doing like some research abroad. I'd look good on my CV. So I applied for it. I didn't kind of expect to get it, but I guess my grades were good. And then I found the right match in University of Calgary. And I was working on more like doing software development. So the project was on actually identifying the source of what is known as the Calgary hum, which is very interesting. It's like this low frequency noise that people around certain neighborhoods heard, and they could never figure out where it was coming from. And this is quite common. Like, it's been heard in different places in the world, and usually it's some kind of an industrial source. so the idea was to then develop this app that could be deployed to everybody's phones, and then you can record, keep it on all night, and whenever the noise starts playing, the app would like automatically detect that and record it, and kind of like store all of that. And eventually the idea was to like add timestamps and geotagging and all of that, and then try to triangulate where the source was. Obviously, I mean, it was a 3-month internship, so we didn't quite get to the end of the project. But yeah, I learned a lot. I did some like DSP development in Java, which I've never used since. But yeah, I mean, if you're developing for Android, that's what you need to do.
Yeah. So exactly. Then, what were your next steps after this internship and after graduating from JU?
Yeah. So after that, I was doing these grad school applications during my my 4th year of engineering. And then I had made a list of these universities that I was going to apply to. So mostly in the US, because I was like, oh, if I have to go for, and I knew I'd wanted to go for a PhD, but mostly because PhDs are funded in the US. So it was not like, oh, I really want to do research and that's why I want to go for a PhD. It's like, oh, I want to get, because like my parents couldn't afford to send me abroad for a master's degree. It's so incredibly expensive, especially with the difference in the Indian rupee and the US dollar. Yeah. So I mean, that was the whole idea. Like, let me apply to a PhD program. And I had done some research in my undergraduate, I had published, I think, 1 paper or something. I was like, okay, I think this is something that I'm going to enjoy doing. And yeah, then I applied for a bunch of PhD programs, got into some of them, didn't get into some of them. But yeah, that's what. But I always knew, like by the 4th year of my college, I knew that I wanted to study music technology more formally.
Okay, and then how did you manage to get actually to one of the best, if not the best, research institute on music, namely the prestigious Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics at the Stanford University, the famous CCRMA?
Yeah. So CCRMA was absolutely in the top of my list. And I was like, okay, this is highly ambitious for me. I'm going to apply anyway because, what's the harm?
There is a harm. There is a harm. Like it really takes a lot of time to put together an application
that's true.
to CCRMA. So yeah, you could think of it like, oh well, I won't apply anyway because I won't make it. So like I think that's the difference, right? Like yeah. So good that you did this.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I knew, because anywhere in the US that you're applying for, you still need to kind of gather the same documents, right? You need like a statement of purpose, letters of recommendation. So obviously the statement of purpose will change depending on, you have to modify it depending on the institution that you're applying to. So I was not too worried about that. I was like, okay, I'm applying anyway, and I'm going to have these materials ready, so I might as well apply to CCRMA. And I think I did email Julia Smith, and I never expected to get a reply back because most of the professors I emailed did not reply to me. But that's the thing about Julius. He answers all his emails. So when he replied to me, I was very happy. I was like, wait, I'm definitely applying to CCRMA. If I managed to get a reply from Julia Smith. And I don't know what it was. Maybe, it's also like a stroke of luck, right? These things, it's hard to determine what exactly got you into the program. But I think the research internship I did in Canada, I think worked out well for me because my supervisor in Canada was like really happy with me. So I think he wrote me a really good letter of recommendation. And also because I had done some research as an undergraduate student and done a bit of work with like Kalman filters and things like that. So it seemed like I was ready at least to, undertake more research. And I don't know what set me apart from other candidates, but I feel like it was a stroke of luck. I'm very grateful. I feel like I got really lucky.
I mean, looking at your research portfolio from the current perspective, I don't think it was a chance.
No, a bit of it. I think a bit of it always is, right, with any job.
So could you share then what was your PhD about?
So in my PhD, I mean, I wrote my thesis on microphone crosstalk cancellation. But honestly, when I started my graduate program, the great thing about CCRMA is it's really free. Like you choose your own projects. So when I started working, I wanted to do everything, right? Because it's the first time I was doing research in this field and learning so many new techniques. So I kind of started working on real-time pitch tracking. I did that for a bit. Then I did some other spectral estimation. And then I was also doing some artificial reverberation. So I was a bit all over the place during my PhD, if I'm being very honest. But I think that's what kept me very excited. And I feel like I picked up different techniques doing all of these, a variety of projects. But by the end, I was like, okay, this is time now. I need to write a thesis. So I decided to focus on like this crosstalk cancellation problem, which is very closely related to the source separation problem. But I was thinking of it more from like a recording perspective, where if you're in a live concert setting or you're recording an ensemble of musicians in a recording studio and then you want to isolate each instrument, how would you do that? And I was not using machine learning or neural networks, so it was like, okay, how can you do it just using DSP?
Nice. And what was the final technique that you decided on?
So we used some statistical estimators. So the maximum likelihood is a very well-known statistical estimator. But I think the main novelty we proposed was if you can do some kind of a calibration stage in the beginning, which is where you're recording one instrument at a time, just maybe playing a few seconds or just doing a sound check, you can actually utilize that information in your statistical estimator. And that gives you a very good initial estimate of where you want to be. And then you kind of iterate on that and improve upon it and get to something that sounds, that basically isolates those instruments quite well.
Okay, awesome. And to everyone who's interested in more details, then they can reach out for your PhD thesis then.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, what was your overall impression of CCRMA? Because if I'm not mistaken, you're only the second person on the podcast who was at CCRMA. So I'm always curious to ask. And could you describe your impression? What was like there? And would you recommend anyone going there for a master's degree or a PhD?
Yeah, I think when I was there, which is now a few years ago, 4 years ago, it's a very special place. Like, it's a community like no other. People are really positive and encouraging. And we used to spend most of our time in the department. So I've been there, working late nights. And then I would see Jonathan Abel come in at 2 a.m. in the morning to print something. So it's a unique place. Like, it's unlike anywhere else I've been. I think the community is so strong and so supportive. And obviously, you've got these stalwart researchers, so Julius, Jonathan, Khrushchev, Jonathan Berger, Ge Wong, and Takako. Like, that's all the faculty. But each one of them is really, really, like a leading researcher in their field. So it's like, from a community perspective and from getting an overview of the field as a whole, I think it's an incredible place to be in. I'm not like entirely sure about the state of DSP research at CCRMA right now because Julius Smith has retired. But I think he is still a professor emeritus, and if he's still taking on grad students, then why not? People should go there. But I feel like right now the focus is more on like HCI and neuroscience and music rather than DSP. So depending on what you want to do, if you want to do DSP, maybe there are a few other options that you can consider. But if you want to do more like VR design, sound design for VR, then CCRMA is still a great place to go to.
Okay, awesome. So then, everyone should just simply shoot an email at Julius Smith.
They should shoot an email at Julius, yes.
Okay, so tell me, like, is it true what I heard that at CCRMA and more broadly at Stanford, is it like all people like constantly, create amazing things in various fields like sports, music, engineering, etc., and their performance is always top notch?
I don't know if everything that they create is great, but I would say that it is an atmosphere of excellence. And I would say like CCRMA's culture and Stanford's culture are a bit different because CCRMA is a lot more relaxed. I think it's a lot friendlier. People are much, much nicer and more open to new ideas. But I would say Stanford as a whole is one of the best things about studying there is that we could actually take courses in any department. And that kind of freedom, very, very few schools would give you. So if you want to really develop a skill set, then, you can just take any course that you want to, and the engineering education was top notch. Yeah, I mean, like, most classes were so well taught and so well organized that it was really, really impressive. So even though the courses were like 3 months, and we worked on a quarter system, not a semester system, but in those 10 weeks, they would pack in so much content. And the assignments would be quite challenging. So by the time you were done with the course, you would actually know a lot more than when you just started. So it was challenging, but I think it's this kind of high level of standard that makes it what it is. And people are in general very motivated, and they are putting in the hours. They might be a bit stressed, but everyone's really challenging themselves, and I think that's where the kind of excellence comes from.
Okay, thanks. Let's pause here for a moment. Orchi is a well-known researcher in the virtual acoustics domain, but what makes her stand out is that she implements a lot of her research in a form of audio plugins. Specifically, she uses the JUCE C++ framework for this purpose. JUCE is an open-source, cross-platform C++ application development framework that makes it easy to create audio software, as well as audio plugins and plugin hosts. You can write code once and build VST, AU, AUV3, AX, and LV2 plugins on Windows, macOS, iOS, Android, and Linux, as well as embedded platforms. I've been successfully using JUCE since 2018, both in my private and professional projects, so I'm delighted that they're sponsoring the podcast. I especially like how JUCE makes it easy for beginners to jump right into creating audio plugins and applications without worrying about C++ quirks. JUCE is used by the majority of the world's most important audio companies, but it is free for personal use, and there's affordable pricing available for companies just starting out. Apart from the framework itself, JUCE has an amazing community of users gathered in the JUCE forum, which is a great resource to learn audio programming on its own. Most recently, the JUCE team has released JUCE version 8, which contains many new features including WebView plugin UIs, which is very exciting. To start using JUCE now, go to juice.com, download JUCE, and follow their Getting Started guide. I have also put a link to it in the description. Have fun creating audio apps and plugins. And now, back to the interview. So, I wanted to ask also in this excellence area, because during your PhD, you completed not one, but 2 internships at prestigious, industry companies, namely at Tesla in 2018 and at Meta Reality Labs in 2020. And I was just curious, how did these research internships come about, and what research did you carry out there?
Mm-hmm. So one of the nice things about Stanford is that it's right in the heart of Silicon Valley. So, like the Apple headquarters or Google headquarters are just a few miles away. And Tesla happened to be, I think, the land that Tesla is on is actually leased out by Stanford. So it's very close to our campus. Mm-hmm. And another good thing about CCRMA is that, again, it has a reputation amongst people in the industry because it's such an old department. So I think for Tesla, somebody reached out to our department administrator saying that they were looking for some interns to work in the summer. And that's how I got in touch with them and then proceeded to do interviews and work there. I was actually not doing any audio at Tesla, interestingly. I was in this team called Noise, Vibration, and Harshness, mm-hmm. which did a lot of harmonic analysis of these signals that you measure from the motors and the dynamometers and so on. And the idea is by analyzing these signals, you can detect then what's not working. So if there is a missing tooth in a gear or something, you would see that in the spectrum. So again, it was quite interesting because I was applying the same techniques that I would apply to my audio research, but to a completely different field. So it's, again, very transferable. If you know DSP, you can work in a wide variety of industries. And so this was, I think, after my second year. Mm-hmm. And at CCRMA, we don't have all of our summers funded, so I needed to find a job, which but again, being in that, being at CCRMA means that you have access to these great companies, and everybody at CCRMA does these fancy internships at Apple and Shazam and all of that. And for Meta, I think that's when I was more focused. So I was already working on artificial reverberation, which is what I'm doing right now, and they have invested heavily in R&D for the metaverse, and they have a massive audio team. Even back then, this was in 2020 during the pandemic. So I had already interviewed and I had got the offer, and then the pandemic happened. So it was a remote internship, which is quite unfortunate. But I really, I really enjoyed that internship because it's a very academic environment. And I mean, I guess I worked in 3 companies, and out of the 3 companies, that's the most academic environment I've been to, where they're really doing blue sky research and they want to push the state of the art forward. Some of that translates into products, but a lot of it doesn't. And because I guess Meta also has the money for it, they can afford to do that, and that's very rare to find in an industry research lab. So yeah, I think that internship really gave me like a lot of confidence, and I was like, okay, this is an area that I'm really interested in, and I know the industry is also interested in it, and I would like to kind of keep working on that, which played a role when I was choosing my postdoctoral position.
Okay, cool. Just a quick question, like, can you give any general advice if someone wanted also to do such an internship and they're not necessarily a student at Stanford?
Yeah, for the Meta internship, I don't think being at CCRMA was particularly helpful because I actually went to a conference and then met a recruiter. So
Okay.
I think that's the best way, ideally, because these conferences are good places for networking. I think it was WASPA, which is held in upstate New York, which is well attended by people from the industry. So I would say, yeah, conferences are great places for networking. Have a business card, exchange contacts, and email them. And the timing is a bit crucial, right? Because if you're doing an internship for the summer, I think around this time, like November, December, is when you should apply. And yeah, sometimes people explicitly put calls out for internship, but sometimes they don't. And even if they don't, if you have the number of a recruiter, you should just like reach out to them with your CV.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. That's a very fair point. Okay, so yeah, then in 2021 you completed your PhD, and then yeah, maybe instead of me saying these names, what happened then for you?
Yeah, so I completed my PhD during the pandemic, and I had a remote dissertation, which I was very upset about because I think I went back to India in 2020, and I was supposed to come back to do my dissertation in person. But then the second wave of COVID hit India, and the US banned all flights from India. The day that I was supposed to fly, I think was when the ban was imposed. And I also tested positive for COVID. So I basically just couldn't go, which was a shame, So I think that year was quite challenging for me because anyway, when you're writing a thesis, it's quite an isolating experience. But add to that a pandemic. So I was like, okay, I need something, like I need a big change and I need something to look forward to. So I started applying for postdoctoral positions before I had submitted my thesis. And then I was considering a few options, mostly in Europe, because I was like, oh, I think I would like. I had visited Europe during my PhD. I was like, oh, I think it would be fun to live in Europe. I was kind of like done living in the US, I think. So then I think there were a couple of options that I was considering quite seriously, but I decided to take up this offer from University of Surrey. So it's University of Surrey is in the UK. It's in this town called Guildford, which is like fairly close to London. And they have the Institute of Sound Recording, which is, and they have like a Department of Music and Media. And they have a very good Tonmeister program, which is a sound recording program. So they've actually, a few Grammy award-winning artists and engineers have actually graduated from that program. So there was this project on scalable room acoustics modeling, which was kind of an extension of the work that I was doing in my PhD. And yeah, I applied to that, interviewed for that, and then I was choosing between that and a couple of different positions. But I think I ultimately made the choice of, moving to the UK, also because it felt like, it's an English-speaking country. It's a bit easier to assimilate. So all of that also, played a factor into me choosing this position.
And what was the project about?
Yeah, so I think we're going to talk a bit more about like room acoustics modeling and reverberation in general. But the idea is that you want to model the acoustics of a space, and you either want to, it could be like a virtual space or a real space. And there are many methods of doing it, but there is this trade-off where there's always a trade-off between computational complexity and accuracy. So you've got these very heavy, computationally heavy methods that will give you accurate results, whereas you also got these very lightweight methods that are more parametric and perceptually motivated, but they don't give you the best accuracy. So the goal of this project was to improve these kinds of parametric methods so that they are more accurate at the cost of increasing some computational complexity, but again, in a scalable way, so that you would choose how much complexity you want to introduce. And based on that, you would get a trade-off between that kind of complexity and accuracy. So yeah, that was the main goal of the project. And we mostly worked with this architecture known as the scattering delay network, which I guess we can get into a bit later, which is kind of a physical model for modeling, how sound propagates in rooms. And the idea was to kind of work on that and make it a bit more physically accurate and robust.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, as you said, we'll hope to get to it in more detail soon. So then after completing this project, then you moved on to the industry, kind of again, since you were doing the internships before, and you got the position of the senior audio research scientist at Sonos in London. So I was just curious, what was your motivation to kind of leave academia and go to the industry, and what were your duties there at Sonos?
Yeah. So to be fair, I did not complete that project. I kind of left it after a year or so. I wasn't actively looking for jobs, but I think Sonos sent out. They were hiring. They were basically hiring quite a few people in this team, and it seemed very interesting, the advert. And I think I sent in my CV, and then somebody got in touch with me, and then my team manager actually reached out to me, and we had a chat. And I think after speaking to him, I was feeling very excited about it. I was like, this is a job that I would love to do. It's just kind of fits perfectly. And I think I was also wanted a bit more like, it's great doing research in academia, but I think in the industry, you can really have an impact, right? Because you're actually shipping to products. And I think I wanted that. And I was also very like, okay, this is a new team that they're doing. And he told me the project that he's hiring for. I was like, okay, this is really ambitious and it fits very well with my skill set. And yeah, it was just, I went through the interview process, which was, like when you basically interview for a job in the industry, it's a long process, right? They do multiple rounds and everything. And I think after my last interview, I was like, okay, will I actually take this job if they offer it to me? And then I said to myself, yes, I would, even though it would mean leaving my postdoc, because I think at that point that particular opportunity really excited me. And I'm somebody who in general is motivated by change. So I always, like the idea of, doing something new and working with a new team or learning a new set of skills. And I think that job opportunity, it looked perfect on paper, honestly. Like if I had to do like a gig in the industry, then that was the gig that I wanted to do.
Okay, sure. And so what were your duties there at Sonos? What were you working on?
Yeah. So I don't know how much I can talk about internal structure, but I ended up working on what is now the wearables innovation team. So Sonos has launched its first pair of headphones this year called the Sonos Ace. And I knew about Sonos from before. I knew that they made like really great quality speakers. But our team basically worked on this spatial audio feature for these headphones. And the unique selling point of these headphones is that if you happen to own a Sonos soundbar, you can actually, a soundbar that, your playing sound from your TV and you're listening to it through the soundbar. But for a lot of people who live in shared household, they don't want to, watch TV very loudly late at night. So could you then do something with the headphones where you swap sound from the soundbar to the headphones, but in a way which doesn't harm your listening experience in any way? Because this soundbar, it's giving you spatial sound, it's immersive, it's sounding, it's 3D sound, and you just don't want to go from that to a stereo down mix. So how can you the question was like, how can you make that transition whilst also giving users, the best listening experience? So the feature that we were working on, which I think is quite ambitious now that I think about it, is to do this kind of like sound swap from the soundbar to the headphones, but in a way that would still maintain the spatial cues, where you just don't send a stereo down mix, but you do binaural rendering of this kind of a multi-channel audio format. But you also make sure that, you model the acoustics of the space that the listener is in. So that the experience is seamless. So it's essentially the same thing as just swapping the sound. There's not a big difference in the listening experience from the soundbar versus the headphones. So that was the feature that my team was working on, and it was a small team. It was like 5 or 6 people, and we kind of pulled it off, which feels great. And I was involved in doing various parts of that research. And I know that the product is out there, and people seem to enjoy this feature, which is really rewarding.
Okay, yeah, I can imagine that it must be very, very rewarding to see something like this, especially in this kind of ambitious scope. So yeah, congratulations on this one for sure.
Thanks.
And then the last point in kind of your bio up to this point is that you then moved from Sonos to King's College, exactly as you said at the beginning, again as a postdoc researcher in immersive audio. And like if I may ask, then why did you want to jump back to the academia after the industry experience?
Yeah, so I think I worked on this feature for like 2 years at Sonos, right? And I think when it shipped, there was a great relief and sense of pride. And then I had time again to ask myself, oh, but where do I really want to go with my career? And I noticed that I had been noticing for a few months that I was really missing doing fundamental research. So the thing about doing applied research in the industry is that the techniques that you end up shipping have been around for decades now, because those are the ones that are well tested and well verified. And obviously the kind of research you do is to ensure that you're optimizing those techniques and running all the tests possible to make something really robust. But I was missing that creative aspect of just doing blue sky research, of like taking an idea and running with it. In my team at that point, I don't know how things have changed since then. I felt like there would be restrictions on doing something like that, because again, we were a team that's very product focused. I know that there are research labs that are not so product focused where you could do something like this. So yeah, I think I was more and more missing that sense of that freedom, and then doing something kind of maybe a little more risky but more creative. And again, like with my other job, it's not something I had planned. The advert just came along, and I again applied to it without thinking too much and proceeded with the interviews, and then went through this entire month where I was very torn between, oh, but I have such a secure job, it pays well, do I really want to go back and be a postdoc again? What is it on the table for me? And ultimately, I think I went with my heart, which was like, again, what is exciting you most? And I was like, yeah, this is exciting me right now. And I think what's great is like I can now bring back all the skills I learned from the industry. And I feel like, honestly, the kind of growth I've had, even as a person in the last 2 years, is something I don't know if I had continued in my postdoctoral position if I would have had that. Because again, it was a completely different working environment, completely different group of people, and a completely different set of deliverables. So I think I felt ready to kind of like bring all of that back into my academic research, whilst also fulfilling this kind of intellectual curiosity that I have.
Okay, awesome. And what are you working on currently at King's College?
So I'm a part of this big project known as Challenges in Immersive Audio Technologies, which is in between 3 universities. So There's King's College, University of Surrey, and University of Southampton. And there's a total of 6 postdocs who are working on this project. So you can see that it's fairly big. And all of us are kind of doing a different part of it. But the big picture is that you want to deliver these immersive audio experiences to multiple listeners in out loud in a space. So maybe you want to recreate a virtual space through this loudspeaker setup or something, but you just don't want to do it for one person. So there's no sweet spot. Rather, you want to do it for a few people, or maybe many people who are in that space. So I am focusing on the room acoustics, the virtual acoustics part of the project, which is how do you render the acoustics of a space perceptually accurately. But then there are other postdocs who are looking at different things like perception and microphone array processing and things like that. But yeah, my work package, as they like to say, work package is on doing virtual acoustics rendering.
Okay, so if we're so deep into this, then I'd like to proceed to the technical questions now, because you've been involved in a number of different research fields related to audio. So I find it really interesting and also educational for the listeners to talk about this as well. So I'd like to discuss with you, some basic ideas in your research, and maybe some references that you can then recommend the listeners to go if they want to get more details. And let's start off with artificial reverberation, which I think is your kind of main area of interest. So could you describe what is it and why do we need it?
Yeah, so I think reverberation is a concept that perhaps most people are familiar with, which is how sound travels and interacts with a space. So if you're in a concert hall, you know that the reverberation is very different than being in your living room. And the goal of artificial reverberation is to recreate this reverberation that either you might have measured in a space or in a space that's completely virtual. But the idea is to then render this reverberation using computer algorithms. So that's the goal of artificial reverberation. And I think people don't realize how every time they listen to music, there is some kind of a reverb plugin that's being applied to most of the instruments and definitely to the vocals. So it's something that people are engaging with on a daily basis, but perhaps they're not aware that there's a whole field of research that's dedicated to it. So yeah, it's how sound travels and propagates and reflects in space. So that is artificial reverberation.
Okay, and then when we're talking about artificial reverberation, do we focus mainly on binaural playback, so with headphones or I guess stereo loudspeakers, or do we also think of artificial reverberation in context of larger loudspeaker setups?
Yeah, it can be all of that. So I think in my research, we're more interested in kind of getting what is known as a room impulse response from one source position to one listener position, and then how you render that impulse response. So you can render it binaurally, which is exactly how the listener would perceive it using 2 ears, or you can render it in a multi-channel format. And this is where spatial audio rendering techniques also come in. So I think in my head, I kind of separate the two, where I say, okay, artificial reverberation is just generation of that sound propagation path, and the playback is more of the spatial audio rendering, where you can either use a multi-channel setup or even stereo or binaural.
Okay, so you described it a little bit, but could you kind of broadly explain, which methods are available to simulate room acoustics, and which ones are your favorite?
I am very biased in terms of which ones my favorite are. But there's 3 broad classes of methods. So I think when this room acoustics simulation really became popular was with the image source method, I think, which was back in the 70s or the 80s by this seminal paper by Allen and Berkeley. So in room acoustics rendering, what you're essentially trying to do is to solve this 3D wave equation from one source to another listener given a space. So then you consider things like, okay, what is the geometry of the space? What are the boundary conditions and so on? And this paper showed that for a shoebox room, which has rigid walls, that means no absorption or scattering or anything like that, then you can very efficiently generate the room impulse response just by using a sequence of scaled echoes. And it gave you like the exact answer as long as these assumptions were satisfied. And so that's a geometric method that we're talking about. So along with the image source method, there was also ray tracing, right? So ray tracing for light was becoming very popular. And therefore, people also started using ray tracing for room acoustic simulation. And then these parametric networks, which were basically essentially recreating a room impulse response, but just using a recursive filter structure. So that would contain some kind of delay lines, which are connected to each other and so on. So these parametric methods also became quite popular. And I think the latest, it's sort of somehow both the oldest and the newest advancement in this field is using these wave-based physics solvers. Mm-hmm. So that way you can use something like a finite difference time domain method to get the exact answer to your 3D wave equation if you specify your boundary conditions and geometry and so on. But these were considered like too heavyweight a few years ago, but now with the advent of GPUs and parallel processing, these are becoming more popular. So you often have a hybrid method, which would use some kind of a wave-based solver in the lower frequencies and then move on to a geometric method in the high frequency regime. But the class of methods that I work on are these parametric delay networks, which I am biased towards. That's why I'm going to say they are my favorite. They are the most lightweight of the lot. But they're also, I think, the hardest to tune. And they're the hardest to, they are very interactive, but it's hard to make them sound good. I think that's where the challenge lies. And that's what I'm working on right now.
Okay, awesome. So let's exactly delve into this topic because I feel like, when one reads about artificial reverberation, it's hard not to read the term feedback delay network and FDN. So could you please explain what is an FDN and why is it so popular, not only in audio research, but in audio applications?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think the FDN was proposed back in, I don't want to say, maybe the 60s or the 70s by Schroeder. And it's just this recursive filter, which has a number of delay lines in parallel. And these delay lines are connected to each other via some kind of a feedback matrix, right? So if there was no matrix and you just had a number of parallel delay lines, you would get these parallel comb filters, right? So they would produce these sequence of echoes, which increase in density over time. Now, this exactly replicates what happens in a room, because when sound travels from a source to a listener, well, there's a direct path, but then there's the first reflection, which is sound bouncing off the closest wall. And then there are successive reflections, and then the echoes increase in time polynomially to create like this very dense distribution of echoes. And that's exactly what this network is capable of emulating. So again, it's kind of like a perceptual model which replicates what happens when sound is transmitted in a real room. And then you can do many kinds of things to it, where it's a general architecture, right? So it's a general architecture that has a number of these parameters. And then you can tune these parameters in many different ways to do various kinds of things. So you can play around with the feedback matrix, you can play around with the delay line lengths, you can add some filters to the delay lines to model sound absorption. And that's why it became like a very popular choice, because it's so lightweight. You just have to implement some delay lines and then connect them in some kind of recursive way. And you can also change the parameters in real time, which is why it's great for music production and things like that, because then you can change the length of the delay lines or the feedback matrix, and it'll give you, it's a sound design problem, right? Like it'll give you a completely different sound. And I think the reason that it became quite popular was, again, it's a general recursive structure and you can do lots of things with it. It's very lightweight and efficient. And then in the 90s, people just showed how you could design these filters to match the exact decay profile that you measure in a room. Mm-hmm. And then, and it just became like really powerful and popular. And because it's also like a perceptual model, there's a lot of like, the design space is quite fast. So you can be really creative in choosing these parameters and doing different things with it. So artificial reverberation is definitely one thing that an FDN is used for, but it can be used for many different kinds of things. So you can also do decorrelation, for example, with FDN. And you can do, depending on you, like if you want to design filters that model, the dispersion in a guitar bridge or something like that, you can also do that with an FDN. So it's really versatile. So it's the general architecture, that is known as the feedback delay network, and what you can do with it is quite like, you can do a lot with it.
Okay, awesome. And you also mentioned this scattering delay network. Is it kind of similar to FDN or different?
Yeah, so like I said, the FDN is a general structure, whereas the scattering delay network is an FDN, but with a very specific structure that models the first order reflections exactly in a room. Okay. So what's great about the SDN is that you pick your delay line lengths based on your source and receiver position. And when the source or the receiver moves, you simply modulate the delay line lengths. And since everything is derived from physics, you can actually get like moving sources and receivers very efficiently, because again, it's still a delay network, which makes it quite efficient. So there are some differences in the architecture, but because the FDN is a general architecture, I would say the SDN is a subclass of that, which is very cleverly designed so that it can give you the right first order reflections.
Okay, awesome. So we have, with all these different models, let's say I'd like to implement, a reverb plugin, and then which methods do you think are most applicable to this purpose?
Yeah, I think one of the methods, which is perhaps the most popular, which I haven't spoken about, is convolution reverb. Mm-hmm. So for convolution reverb, if you just measure room impulse response, you can do real-time convolution with your input signal. And that way, because, if you measure a room impulse response, obviously it's going to be the most accurate that you can get. So I think convolution reverb is really popular in plugins. You can do what is known as partition convolution, where you break up your signal, your reverberation, your room impulse response into chunks, and then convolve and then overlap add and so on. But feedback delay networks are also really popular for doing plugins because they're so efficient. So I think those two are the most, as far as I'm aware, maybe there are, because there's this new startup called Treble. I don't think they're doing like real-time simulations, but I know that they're doing some kind of like physics-based solver along with ray tracing or something like that. But for plugins, I think I would say that convolution reverb and these parametric plugins, the SDN or the FDN, are quite popular.
Okay, thanks. And finally, could you tell maybe what are current open challenges of artificial reverberation?
Yeah, so I think now that, we are really focusing on sound for AR and VR, we want to model like complex geometries, right? And we want to model measured spaces. So like if you are, if you wear a pair of AR glasses and walk into a space, and then you want to put a virtual sound source somewhere in that space, you need to model the acoustics of that space while the listener navigates. So there's this problem of 6 degrees of freedom sound field reconstruction, which is if you're in a space and if you're moving around and you're rotating your head, how do you then render reverberation for that accurately? So that's a big open problem that, it's very challenging and hasn't been solved yet. Then there is modeling reverberation in complex geometries, because a lot of these, the FDN is completely perceptual, right? But even the image method or the SDN, they only work with shoebox rooms. Mm-hmm. Most real rooms are not shoebox. And most, you also have complex geometries like coupled spaces and so on, which is what a large part of my research is focused on. So how do you then model the complex acoustics in these kinds of scenarios? And then ultimately bringing it all together, like how do you then do this kind of, real-time rendering in these complex spaces while the user navigates and walks around the space? So yeah, it's a holy grail, and it's quite a challenging problem, and we're not there yet. So there's still lots to do.
Yeah, but do you think it's possible to have like this one perfect unified model that is capable of modeling complex acoustic spaces, yet is real time?
That's our goal. I don't know if it's possible, but yeah, okay. We can get plausible results. Perhaps we'll not get perceptually indistinguishable, which is again the bar. But then now we are aiming for plausibility. Does it sound like it could, does it overall, does it increase your sense of immersion, and does it give you a better experience than if you just had no reverberation at all, or didn't bother modeling the acoustics of the space at all?
Okay, thanks. And if someone from the audience wanted to learn more about artificial reverberation, is there a book or a resource that you would recommend for going deeper with this subject, or is this knowledge scattered across research papers?
So there's quite a few books on room acoustics modeling, which I think is a good place to start, because that gives you the motivation for what you're trying to solve in artificial reverberation. So there's this book by Kutruf, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, called Room Acoustics. For artificial reverberation, because I would say it's still, the knowledge is scattered in various different papers. But one paper that came out, I think it's been more than 10 years now, it's called 50 Years of Artificial Reverberation.
Oh yeah, I exactly. I interviewed Julian Parker.
Oh yeah,
in the previous episode of the podcast. So it all comes together now.
That's a great paper, but I guess now it's a bit outdated, right? Because it's been 10, 12 years since then. So maybe we should write like 60 years of artificial reverberation. But that's a good starting point.
Yeah. By the way, they also made like a follow-up. They had a paper more
than 50 years. That's right.
Yeah. So exactly. Like let's let you all brains get together and write 60 years now. So it's great that the research is developing so fast that more and more are ready. Okay, sorry for interrupting. Like, are there any more resources that you would come to your mind?
For reverberation, Julius Smith has this book called Physical Audio Signal Processing. And I think he has a chapter on artificial reverberation that's also quite nice, that talks about FDNs and things like that.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, we can link to it. It's available online, right?
Yes,
so we can
right.
simply link to it. Nice. And okay, so closing now the topic of artificial reverberation a little bit, I wanted to ask, because at Sonos you worked on algorithms that can be described as relating to spatial audio. So I hear this term quite often, and like, is there really a definition what spatial audio is and what it isn't? And how does it differ from immersive audio, for example?
That's a great question. I think this term is quite abused, and I have done it myself. Where I do use spatial audio and immersive audio interchangeably. But
Okay.
I'm not aware if there's an academic definition for it. But in my head, like, immersive audio is the umbrella term, and which involves artificial reverberation. And then spatial audio is more about recreating sound in space, so which focuses very much on sound source localization. For example, like if a sound is at this angle, this many meters away from you, how would you simulate that? So techniques like binaural rendering is spatial audio, maybe VBAP, which is vector-based amplitude panning, that is spatial audio. So I don't know, this is an academic definition, but this is in my head. This is how I separate the two. So artificial reverberation combined with spatial audio in my head would be immersive audio.
Okay, and so in this term of spatial audio, would also like multiple speaker playback also count in?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Multi-channel playback. So ambisonics, sound field reconstruction, all of that is spatial audio.
Okay, and then could you name some examples where we can hear nowadays this application, of immersive music and spatial audio?
Yeah, so I don't know if people have an Apple Music subscription, and if they happen to listen to an Atmos mix. Atmos is this multi-channel, a mixing tool developed by Dolby, which is object-based audio, which means you place sources of audio in a 3D space around you, and they're treated as objects. So yeah, that's I think people are actually engaging with spatial audio quite frequently without realizing that they are. So if you happen to listen to Apple Music on a speaker that can play back Atmos, the AirPods can. The AirPods will give you a binaural rendering of that. Then you are engaging with spatial audio, right? And even if you're watching something on Netflix, which is mixed in 5.1 or 7.14, or again in Dolby Atmos, again you're engaging with spatial audio. So I think when we are consuming entertainment these days, obviously we've always gone to movie theaters and experienced spatial sound, but these days we're also, it's become a part of our lives. Even at home we can get spatial audio. And or if you're playing a game, for example, gaming is one of those big application areas of spatial audio. So yeah, I think if you're engaging with audio visual entertainment in most forms these days, it is probably spatial audio. So we've now, stereo is still great, but I think now we've moved beyond stereo and we're doing Atmos and other spatial formats.
Okay. And is it difficult to, create an Atmos setup at home?
I have not tried, but you would need a few speakers. But you can also get I think you can mix on headphones with Atmos. It'll render the output for you binaurally through headphones.
Okay, thanks. And so is there, a book or resource on spatial audio that you would, recommend as a primer?
So for more technical spatial audio research, I do have a recommendation. But I myself am looking for something that's more, for people who are producing music, who are mixing. I'm sure there's a lot of resources for that. But for a researcher, a really good kind of in-depth book is Parametric Time Frequency Domain Spatial Audio, which is by Ville Pulki, who is in Alto, and I think is one of the top people working in this area.
Okay. Yeah, I had the privilege of meeting him in person. So yeah, that's always nice to hear this kind of a recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay. And finally, I wanted to ask, because what I've learned is that you, in your current research, you try to also apply, machine learning methods to immersive audio problems. And we see, I think, this trend more and more of applying machine learning and deep learning in digital signal processing. And I was just curious, if you don't mind, that it's a completely new set of tools for you, because when you are starting at the university, these over 10 years ago, like these methods did exist but were completely outside of the audio domain. And I think it's a big challenge. As you said, you like learning new things, so I think it's a big challenge to learn like this whole area for current research. So I just wanted to ask you, how do you approach, learning this complex field and learning these tools that you can apply?
I think one of my biggest regrets while I was at Stanford is all of this deep learning research was already happening at Stanford when I was there. Obviously, it's not as big as it is now, especially in audio. But I was so focused on getting my DSP chops up to date, that I didn't bother. But now it's something that, now I see it as a tool to solve problems. So there are some things that it's just better at doing. And for me, I'm still not someone who's a big proponent of end-to-end learning. Whereas for me, if I'm using machine learning, I'm using it as within my DSP framework to maybe learn one part of the system or something. And learning it has been, obviously I haven't published any literature on using deep learning yet, but I'm kind of working on a project. And I think what's great about deep learning is that the software libraries are so good that you can get started without without really knowing the details. Obviously, and there's a lot of resources out there depending on how much detail you want to go into. There's so many great YouTube videos for absolute beginners. I think 3 Blue 1 Brown 3B1B has this great series on LLMs and deep neural networks, which I found to be quite nice. And then I just started going through some open source repositories which were using machine learning for this artificial reverberation, and saw how they were setting things up, and then learned how to use PyTorch. So I'm still not up to date with all of the various DNN architectures. I'm just starting from the very basics. But I think because these software libraries are so developed, it's actually not that hard to get started with it, and then you can always read the papers, and most of this code is also now on GitHub, so go check that out and then try to build your own models.
Yeah, I think also it's a very pleasant experience seeing how many resources are out there. Okay, and finally, I wanted to ask you, in your industry work and in your academia research work, which technologies, namely programming languages, IDEs, operating system tools, do you use in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so when I was doing my PhD, I was doing everything in MATLAB, which
No.
I thought was very convenient back then. But post my PhD, I haven't used it. So I've now switched completely to Python. And
yes. No, I'm joking. I just, I was joking that I don't like MATLAB on this channel, but I always respect it. But
yeah, I mean, I don't use it anymore. So, I've converted completely. I think Python is just so much more versatile and you can do so much more with it. And one good thing about working in the industry is that they have really good coding standards that you have to follow. So I know I was writing bad research code before, but now I try to be quite organized about it, and use the tools. So lint checkers, unit testing, things like that I was not using before for Python development. So I actually don't use an IDE. I do it maybe this is a much slower way of doing it, but I use the terminal for debugging, and I use Sublime Text, like any text editor, really. And then I do a lot of my testing with Jupyter notebooks, because then you can do plots and everything. So I try to keep the test code separate from the source code as much as possible. And there's also this very nice tool that not a lot of researchers know about, which is called Pydantic. Which is, again, if you want to put because when we are doing research, we are giving all kinds of input parameters that, we would like to tune. So if you want to, have a tunable parameter, then, you can use Pydantic to set up config files using YAML and things like that. So that's my day-to-day research. Obviously, I think if you're an audio researcher, it helps to know how to use a digital audio workstation. So I was using a lot of Reaper and Max MSP at Sonos for testing. And for plugin development, I'm not a C++ developer, but I use JUCE and Xcode. And I think that's it. As a researcher, obviously, I use Zotero for keeping track of papers. This is I guess that's quite a few tools, but these are the main ones.
Okay, thank you so much. And this, concludes this kind of technical part of the interview. So thank you so much, for sharing and making this so accessible to everyone. Then at the end, I have a few, let's say, fun questions. One of them is that I also noticed that you've developed a few audio plugins yourself, something that you've just mentioned, also with JUCE. And I'm just curious, what have you implemented in those plugins?
I'm not a good C++ developer at all. But for me, what I find interesting is because we're always talking about real-time audio when we write our papers, and then we don't actually end up implementing anything in real time. So I wanted to break away from that, and then at least for the artificial reverb plugins actually implement something that people can use, or at least I can use. So I have my C++ skills are subpar, but I can do all the DSP programming. I'm not good at setting up a good workflow in terms of unit testing and things like that. But my testing method is very hacky. It'll be debugging particular lines, also having my DAW crash many times for figure out what's going on. But I think I enjoy writing that kind of DSP code, because that's what ultimately, when it gets translated, the research gets translated into something usable. You need to have that step where you go from this kind of slow research code to optimized C++. And I it's something that I would like to get better at. It's something that I've only done not that frequently. I can do it, but I would really like to learn more.
Awesome. Then I encourage you to subscribe to my channel.
Yeah, absolutely. I do. I mean, I'm a subscriber. I think I've been following your channel for a while.
Oh, thank you. So something that I think anyone should be able to learn from you, or want to learn from you, is this incredible, I think, productivity as a researcher. And in my opinion, you've also been very successful, which I think in DSP in general it's not easy. So I was just curious, if you have given this some thought, and were you able to identify any factors that helped you in this journey, like particular habits or daily routines? And is there anything that could help the listeners of this podcast become better DSP researchers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting, because I never think of myself as a productive researcher. I think I'm somebody who's very, I have bursts of productivity when I'm really very focused for a few weeks, and then I'll have a week where I'm like, oh, I'm just not feeling it. I think I've become better at it. I used to be a lot more chaotic back in my PhD days, because I used to work whenever, Whereas I think transitioning into industry helped me with that, because you can only Slack people at certain times of the day. You're not going to send a Slack at 2 a.m. So then I started having these fixed work hours, and that's working out well for me. For me personally, I think it's finding that one thing that you really enjoy. For me, that is core DSP, doing some derivations, and I like the mathematical part of it. And nowadays, I'm also really enjoying the programming part of it. So I know that those two are the things that keep me motivated. And whereas, the good thing about research is there are so many different things that you can do at any point of time. You can either read papers, you can debug code, or you can, do some derivation. So I think if you're getting stuck with something, then move on to the other thing and then come back. And also, listen to your body and listen to your mind. Some days you just can't focus, and then let it be. Do the easy tasks, reply to your emails. But yeah, trying to also having fixed work hours has really worked out well for me. But yeah, I think most people hopefully have decent work hours and not, working whenever they feel like.
Hopefully, yeah, I agree. So in this, core DSP research, and your also intensive learning at Stanford, of the DSP part, were there again any books or resources that you would recommend for people new to this field?
Yeah, so I was fortunate, to take classes at Stanford that were pretty advanced. But again, I always start with Julia Smith's books, so Mathematics of the Discrete Fourier Transform and Introduction to Digital Audio Filters. I don't exactly remember the name, but those are his two introductory books. And I think that's great for DSP focused on audio, because you have a lot of DSP books, but not all of them are going to talk about audio, whereas this one is this really focused book, which is great for learning. And I don't know if other people do this, but sometimes I just spend some time answering questions on DSP Stack Exchange, because I think that really, helps me write down some thoughts and ideas and do some derivations that I've forgotten. So those books definitely. And then again, DSP is also something that's not just theoretical. You can learn by doing. And so you can get started with Python, just do some simple filter design, listen to the results. It's easy to set it up. So yeah, hands-on practice. And I do think it's worth going through the math because then you really understand what's going on.
Thank you for saying this, because I also believe that it's crucial actually to understand what you're implementing if you want to implement this right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and then when you're doing research, you're working on codes, reading papers, etc., do you listen to music?
I do, not always, but sometimes.
Okay, and what kind of music?
Oh gosh, I have too many playlists on Spotify. I've noticed that if I'm listening to new music, then I get distracted more easily because my mind is just then focusing more on the song, especially if it's good. So I like listening to stuff that I've already, listened to before and I'm quite familiar with. And yeah, so one good thing about working at Sonos was we got really good discounts on the speakers. So I invested in some good speakers, and now I do listen to a lot of music. Not always, but sometimes while working.
Okay, nice. So again, totally random question. If someone wanted to get a research position in the industry, would you recommend they got a PhD?
I think this one is a tricky one. It depends on the industry and the company. I know that in machine learning particularly I've heard that without a PhD, it's hard to get research positions. In DSP, I'm not sure. Because I think even with a master's degree, as long as you know how to do research, it should be, it should be completely doable, right? As long as you can think critically and then dive into the details, because I think that's all that research is really. It should be possible. Like when I was at Sonos, not most people in our team had a PhD, but not everybody did. But everybody was working on the same projects. So I think it's just a mindset thing. Some people don't need a PhD to do research. Of course, I mean it trains you, right, in a way. But in the industry, I think you can work as a researcher, especially if you're doing applied research without a PhD.
Okay, thanks. And do you think that having a PhD title would help someone get an audio developer position in the industry?
Not necessarily. It would help with the research scientist position, but I don't think it would. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks a lot. So another random question. I saw that at Sonos you were, involved in a women's employee resource group called Women at Sonos. And I was just curious to ask, what is the role of such groups in companies?
Yeah, I think when I joined Sonos, UK team was very, very small, and I was the only woman there. And since then, it's now 30 people. Now there are 2 women there. So you can see that, it's not particularly great. So I think the idea is for to connect women with each other so that they know that they're not the only ones who are working there, and you don't feel like that there's nobody else who looks like you. But we also used to organize events throughout the year. So I think one of the events I organized that I was very happy with was this talk by Leslie Castenbird, who is a mastering engineer and who's, I think, also the acting president of AES, the Audio Engineering Society. And she was doing her PhD at University of Surrey on inclusivity in immersive audio. And I think she spoke about, like things that she has found in her research about what the barriers to entry are and why things are bad and what we can do. So I think, it just makes the space more inclusive, and you also don't feel like you're the only one, who's doing this, and there are other people out there. So the whole point for these groups is to connect people from like a diverse groups with each other.
Okay, I understand. And like you touched on this briefly, but do you think in general that the audio industry, suffers from a lack of balance in gender diversity?
Yeah, absolutely it does. And I'm trying to think, when my first conference was DAFX 2017. And when I went there, I don't know how many women there were, 4 or 5 maybe in the entire conference. And then this year when I attended DAFX, obviously the representation is better. It's still not improved as much as it should have, but it's getting better. And I think it's because what's happened is I think it's like a lack of role models, right? You need more women in different places there's so many, like there's this thing known as the leaky pipeline syndrome, where as women climb up the career ladder, they tend to drop off.
Okay.
So to prevent things like that from happening, right? So, and give people, like when you see role models, you feel more confident that yes, I can also get there. And I think our industry does have a lack. There are a few women, but there's not like quite as many as there should be. But I think for people who are in my age group now, I believe that the representation is better. It's not great, but it's better than what it used to be.
Okay, awesome. And I think you're a perfect role model in this situation. So I hope that your career will inspire other women also to take up the DSP mantle and hopefully lead us into a more balanced environment in this regard. Okay, then to a different question yet again, because what's really impressive also in your portfolio is that you visited a huge number of research facilities. Apart from these mentioned, you were also a visiting researcher at the Aalto University in Finland. So that's where Ville Pulkki is at, the Technical University of Berlin, and also IRCAM in Paris, which is also very well known, I think, in the artificial reverberation space. So out of all these, research institutes that we mentioned, are you able to specify, how they differ and which, traits make them as successful as they are?
That's a great question. So I think when I went to IRCAM, I was not yet doing artificial reverberation research. So I was working with the sound analysis and synthesis group, which had by then already moved on to deep learning, where I was doing like more traditional signal processing. So I felt like I was lagging behind a bit whilst I was there. And at TU Berlin, I didn't really work with anyone because basically my supervisor had gone there on a sabbatical, and I kind of went along with him. But I really enjoyed Berlin as a city, I must say that. And I think the group at TU Berlin is a really strong group in virtual acoustics. But I think my favorite research visit was probably to Alto because it was the shortest visit. I was just there for 2 weeks. But I was working very closely with Sebastian Schlecht, and it was very focused. We kind of knew what we were doing. We ended up publishing this journal paper. And I just found the atmosphere at Alto to be like really, again, kind of like CCRMA, where it's very friendly. People talk to each other, people hang out with each other. And I think that's how you breed like good ideas and good research culture. So I think the success to having a good research institute is to have good people in it.
Okay, yeah, there you go. That's the recipe. Okay. Apart from research, you also compose, perform, and record your own music. So you mentioned a few instruments already, but I wanted to ask, is this list full? Like, which instruments do you play? And is there a place also where someone can listen to your music?
Yeah, I do upload. I feel like I'm doing less and less music now, which is very sad. I've not performed in a while. So I'm very much, I used to play in college, but then it kind of became, I'm more into like composing and producing and releasing stuff. And I do upload stuff on SoundCloud. So I have a profile if people want to listen. But again, I'm in the very amateur space where I'm not doing this professionally. I'm not making money out of it, but I enjoy it. So my original instrument is the guitar, which I started learning when I was quite young. And I think the instrument I enjoy playing the most is the bass. I also play a little bit of keys. I play the mandolin. I really got into playing the mandolin. And I also play this, not very well, but I play this folk instrument from West Bengal, which is where I'm from, which is a fretless stringed instrument. So yeah, different permutations of stringed instruments.
Okay, cool. And do you find it that it helps you somehow relax after work?
Yeah, absolutely. Playing music, also just listening to music.
Okay, and do you have any other ways to, rest and recharge after work? Or do you, read papers all the time?
No, I don't read. I've gotten much better at this. So if I'm by myself, I do end up spending a lot of time on YouTube. I follow quite a few science communicators. So that's why I know about your channel as well, because I love watching these, educational YouTube videos. Some of them are audio related, but most of them are not. But it just helps me, keep in touch with what's happening in the scientific world in general. So yeah, I spend too much time on YouTube. And apart from that, yeah, I like, especially after I moved to the UK, I think I love going to like museums, and I love going out. Also spend a lot of time with friends. So sometimes on weekends, we'll just stay indoors and cook and eat and watch films and all. So, I do switch off. I used to struggle with that, but nowadays I feel like it's better for my mental health. Not working to not think about work.
Awesome. So I think it sounds like a really, really good balance of focused work and time off, and also what you mentioned about having more intense period versus more relaxed period.
Yes.
I think it's exactly on par of what I heard. This is healthy for long-term sustained high performance. Okay, thanks a lot, Orchi, for this interview. I really, really appreciate your time, expertise, and your generosity with sharing all this information, all these resources. The last question from my side is that if anyone from the listeners wanted to contact you, where do you recommend they go?
Yeah, so I think LinkedIn might be the best place, and also they can drop me an email. I respond to most of my emails, especially if you send it to my personal Gmail. I'm not on Twitter, so I think those are the two places where people can reach me if they want to. But also, yeah, I mean, I keep meeting people in conferences, so I love having in-person chats. So someone just comes up to me and introduces themselves to me. I think that's the best way of starting a conversation.
Yeah, and I can confirm that you're very friendly towards strangers.
No, I really like the DAFX community.
Oh yeah, that's true. That's a very good place to be in. So is it okay if we link to your email in the episode notes as well?
Yeah. Maybe my Stanford email, because it's still active, and it is forwarded to my personal Gmail. So.
Okay, perfect. So thank you once again, and I wish you all the best to all your current and future endeavors.
Yeah, thank you. I'm very glad that I got an opportunity to be a part of this podcast, and yeah, I've learned a lot from it. So it feels really nice to be invited.
Thank you. Right, everyone, that was Orchisama. Thank you, Orchi, for this amazing interview and your positive energy. To you, dear listener, if you'd like to check out some of the references, people, places mentioned in this podcast episode, please go to episode notes at thewolfsound.com/talk026. Once again, it's thewolfsound.com/talk026. If you'd like to help the podcast somehow, please subscribe to the WolfSound channel on YouTube and give a thumbs up to this video. Leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast and on Spotify, and suggest in the comments on YouTube or on the blog who should be the next guest on the podcast. Well, who knows, maybe you would like to come on the podcast. You're wholeheartedly invited if you have an interesting story to share. Don't forget to check out my DSP Pro online course on learning digital audio signal processing at wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. No strings attached. If you have some free time, you can just go through the course. And if there's anything you don't like about it, you can always give me feedback and ask for a return, which you'll get instantly. So I think, the whole risk is on me, not on you. Well, but of course, that's up to you to decide. For more details, go to wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. Once again, it's wolfsoundacademy.com/DSP-Pro. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next episode. Take care.